Welcome back to Reddit Tales by Uncle Sammy. I see you, I appreciate you, and I'm thankful you subscribed and keep showing up. This space is built on your insights. Leave your thoughts and lessons below. Now, cue the tension, cue the truth, let's get into it. Before this story starts, pay attention to the small moments people try to brush past. A spouse being startled by your presence is not always suspicious. But when surprise turns into irritation and simple kindness makes them nervous, that is worth noticing. In this story, the red flag was not just what I saw in my wife's face when I knelt to fix her skirt. It was how fast she tried to move me out of her world. Tell me in the comments right now, what would you do if you showed up to surprise your spouse and their first reaction was panic instead of love? If that kind of story pulls you in, make sure you like, share, and subscribe because the twist in this one only gets worse. My name is Omari Vance, and for most of my marriage, I believe steady love was enough to keep a home standing. I was 38 that fall, the owner of a small alteration shop in West Baltimore, the kind of place with humming presses, dress forms, a window, and a brass bell that rang every time somebody came in from the cold. My wife, Celeste, was 35 and worked as events director at the Ashby House, an old downtown hotel with marble floors, velvet chairs, and a doorman who acted like every wedding party was headed for the governor's mansion. We had been married 9 years. Not a dramatic 9. Not the kind people clap for at anniversary dinners, because the couple looks like they survived a flood together. Ours was quieter than that. We paid bills on time. We argued about groceries, and whose turn it was to call my mother back. We watched old detective reruns with captions on, because Celeste liked to eat crunchy snacks and could never hear over herself. I ironed my own collars on Sunday nights. She lined her shoes up by color. We were the kind of couple people called solid because nothing looked broken from the sidewalk. In October, wedding season was still dragging its hem through my life. Brides wanted impossible things fixed in impossible time. A beaded sleeve ripped at 6, a mother of the bride zipper snap at 8, and somehow every emergency became holy. Celeste understood that rhythm because hotel events ran the same way. Somebody forgot to place cards. Somebody added 40 guests. Somebody's uncle got drunk and tried to move a podium. We were supposed to understand each other better than most. That was the story I told myself whenever she came home late with tired eyes and the faint smell of lemon cleaner on her blazer. Celeste had changed so gradually that I first mistook it for pressure. She started keeping her phone face down at dinner. She used a softer voice when she stepped into the hallway to take calls, the voice she used with brides whose budgets were smaller than their demands. She began wearing perfume to weekday staff meetings. Not much, just enough for me to notice when she passed. When I asked if the hotel had a new investor or a difficult client, she said, "Fourth quarter, baby." Everybody gets intense. I nodded because I knew how easy it was to confuse exhaustion with distance. There were little things too small to accuse and too sharp to forget. Celeste stopped asking me to stop by the hotel. Early in our marriage, she loved when I brought her lunch. She would make me stand in the ballroom and admire centerpieces like they were public art. Then, over the summer, she started saying the loading dock was too busy. The front desk was overwhelmed. Security was stricter. "Just meet me at home," she would say. "It's easier." Easier became her favorite word. Easier means do not look too close. My shop sat between a corner carryout and a barber shop with old-school posters fading in the sun. Mr. Reggie from next door swept his own sidewalk like it was a point of pride. Every morning he leaned in my doorway with his coffee and gave me opinions nobody asked for. A man can tell when his house is cooling off, he told me one chilly morning while buses side passed on Edmondson Avenue. I laughed and said he'd been divorced too long to give marital advice. He laughed too, but not all the way. "I'm serious," he said. "Cold hits you before the storm does." I did not tell him I had noticed the cold. I kept those thoughts where I kept loose pins, tucked into a little magnetic dish near the register. Celeste and I were raised in church, and even after we stopped attending every Sunday, I still carried an old-fashioned belief that you protected your marriage in public. You did not let people snack on your private pain. So when folks at New Hope Missionary asked how Celeste was doing with that fancy hotel job, I smiled and said, "Still running the City One banquet at a time." Meanwhile, I was counting the weeks since she had reached for my hand, without me offering it first. The Tuesday it happened had started like any other overloaded day. I was hemming a choir robe for a woman who needed it by Wednesday night revival, and my apprentice, Tasha, was arguing with a steam press that liked to spit water when offended. Around 11, my phone lit up with a message from Celeste. "Major luncheon today. No chance for dinner. Don't wait up." There was nothing strange in the words. What bothered me was the timing. She usually texted after lunch rush began, not before noon, like she wanted to get ahead of something. I had already planned to see her that day. The week before, she had complained that the slit lining on one of her work skirts was coming loose. I told her to bring it to the shop. She forgot. That morning, I found the small emergency sewing kit I kept in my glove compartment, the one in a tin shaped like a butter cookie container. My Aunt Odessa, who taught me tailoring, used to say, "A prepared man can save a whole day with a needle and patience." I packed the kit, bought Celeste a cup of sweet potato coffee from the cafe near Lexington Market, and headed downtown. Baltimore in late October has a damp kind of cold that sneaks under your collar. The harbor wind made people hunch into themselves. Delivery trucks double-parked. A saxophone player was working the corner near the courthouse, blowing something low and lonely into the gray air. Ashby House stood there with its old brick face polished for money. I had been inside enough times to know the service elevators, the banquet kitchens, the employee hallway that always smelled like starch and burnt coffee. Still, walking to the lobby with that warm cup in my hand, I felt like a husband doing something simple and right. The front desk clerk, a young man named Devin with perfect part lines in his hair, looked surprised to see me. "Mr. Vance," he said, lowering his voice. "Are you here for Miss Celeste?" I smiled and lifted the coffee, trying to be useful. He glanced toward the event corridor before looking back at me. It was quick, but it landed. "She's upstairs in the Calhoun suite area," he said. "Big corporate luncheon." Then he added, "You might want to text first." I almost asked why. Instead, I said thanks and kept moving, because I did not want to feel warned before I knew what I was being warned about. The Calhoun suite hallway was quieter than the lobby, carpeted in that thick, muted pattern hotels used to hide where. I could hear dishes clinking behind one set of doors and the faint voice of somebody testing a microphone. Celeste stood near a service station at the bend in the hall, half turned toward a man I knew by sight, but not by heart. Nigel Brooks, the hotel's food and beverage director. He had a tall, neat beard, expensive watch, the kind of smile that liked itself. Celeste laughed at something he said, then looked down and tugged at the back of her skirt. I called her name before I reached them. She turned so fast the laugh vanished from her face, like somebody cut a light switch. "Omari," she said, and her voice did not sound pleased. It sounded caught. I stepped closer and saw the issue right away. The back hem of her pencil skirt had snagged on a rolling rack, folding the lining up and twisting the fabric. "Hold still," I told her, already reaching into my jacket for the little sewing tin. "Your hem is caught. You're going to tear it worse if you keep pulling." I bent down, fingers careful on the fabric. That was when she said it. "Honey, what are you doing here?" Not soft, not amused. Sharp, breathy, almost angry, like my being there had interrupted more than her day. I looked up from the skirt and saw Nigel watching us. He took one step back, then another, but not before I caught the expression on his face. Not guilt exactly. Annoyance. The kind a man wears when something he counted on has become inconvenient. My hands kept working from habit, smoothing the lining flat, finding the loose stitch. I heard myself say, "Bringing you coffee," fixing what needed fixing. Celeste glanced up and down the hall, like I had appeared in the wrong church. "You should have called," she said. I gave a little laugh, because what else was I supposed to do with a sting in my chest? Since when do I need an appointment to bring my wife a drink? Nigel cleared his throat. "I'm going to check the ballroom," he said, though nobody had asked him anything. Celeste stepped aside to let him pass, and the space between them felt practiced, not physical, familiar, comfortable enough to be dangerous. I finished a quick tack stitch and stood. "There," I said. At least it won't split on you before lunch. I handed her the coffee. She took it without looking at me. Thank you, she said, too formal for a wife, too crisp for a woman whose husband had just saved her from walking into a room with a broken M. Then she added, we're in the middle of something complicated. The sentence sat there between us like a third person. I remember nodding as if that explained why she looked more upset to see me than grateful. I had two choices in that hallway. I could have asked the direct question right then. Who is he to you? Why do you look afraid of me seeing you together? Or I could keep my dignity under my coat and leave with my eyes open. I chose the second one because public scenes never end the way hurt people imagine they will. They do not deliver the truth. They deliver spectacle. And maybe, if I am honest, part of me still wanted there to be a clean explanation, a misunderstanding, a tension I had dramatized in my own head. All right, I said, do your thing. She nodded too quickly. I waited for her to ask me to stay a minute, to kiss my cheek, to make me feel like a husband instead of a courier. She did not. I rode the elevator down with an ache that had not fully found its name. In the lobby, the doorman opened the front door, and a hard wind hit my face. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, holding the empty sewing tin. The little spool of navy thread inside had come loose and rolled into the corner, like something trying to hide. Back at the shop, I made mistakes I normally would have scolded Tasha for. I sewed a cuff half an inch too narrow and had to rip it out. I pressed a satin sash too hot and nearly scorched it. Tasha leaned against the cutting table and watched me in silence before asking, "You all right?" She was 22 and had the kind of clear eyes young people still have before life teaches them to pretend less. I almost told her the whole thing. Instead, I said, "I think I walked into something I wasn't supposed to see." She frowned. "Then maybe you saw exactly what you needed." That night, Celeste came home after 10. She was carrying a bakery box from a place near the harbor that sold tiny lemon tarts for too much money. "Leftovers from the luncheon," she said, setting the box on the counter. "Are you still up?" I had been sitting in the kitchen listening to the radiator click, pretending to read an invoice ledger. "I'm up," I said. She leaned down to kiss my forehead, an affectionate move she used when she wanted credit for warmth without risking conversation. Her perfume was stronger than usual. I wanted to ask who told her citrus smelled good on her. I asked whether the luncheon went well. "It was a mess," she said, slipping off her heels. Nigel almost had a fit over the wine order. She said his name easily, casually, like I had not been measuring the shape of it. All afternoon. Then she opened the refrigerator and stood there too long looking into it, without taking anything out. "You surprised me today," she added. "I know," I said. "That part was obvious." She closed the refrigerator door and turned. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Make it sound weird." There it was. Not concerned that my feelings were hurt. Concerned that I might name what she had tried to keep blurry. I told myself not to interrogate a tired woman in our kitchen. So I made another choice. I said, "I fixed your skirt and went back to work." "That's all." Her shoulders dropped a fraction. Relief moved across her face, so quickly she probably did not even feel it. "Okay," she said. "Good." Then she took one of the lemon tarts out of the box, set it on a plate for me like a peace offering, and went upstairs to shower. I sat there staring at the tart until the glaze dulled. It occurred to me that people do not exhale like that unless they thought they might be caught. The next week I noticed how often Nigel's name entered our house. Not in romantic ways. In practical ones, which somehow made it worse. Nigel said the florist was late. Nigel wanted the linen samples changed. Nigel was impossible about timing. Nigel thought the holiday package should include jazz. When a person you love says another person's name too often, you begin hearing the pattern before you hear the meaning. I started keeping count without meaning to. 5 times one evening. 7 the next. She never mentioned any other colleague that much. Even her irritation with him carried an intimacy I could not unknot. November brought early darkness and wedding expos. At my shop, mothers came in with impossible dresses and impossible opinions. At the hotel, Celeste worked more Saturdays than before. One Friday, She said she needed to stay overnight because a pharmaceutical conference had been set up and the city was expecting sleet. We had enough weather in Baltimore to know that Might Ice was a good excuse for anything. I almost accepted it. Then I remembered how startled she looked when I touched the back of her skirt. I said, "I'll drive you in early." She answered too fast. No, I've already arranged a room block issue. I'll be fine." That answer sat with me all day. I had no proof, only a growing stack of moments that refused to flatten out. So I did something I am not proud of, though I understand why I did it. I checked her phone bill online. Not messages, just call logs and durations. Nigel Brooks's number was there again and again, sometimes late, sometimes in the middle of her supposed meetings, once for 28 minutes on a Sunday afternoon when she had told me she was helping her cousin pick drapes in Columbia. Numbers are plain things. They do not explain themselves, but they do not blush either. I did not confront her that night. That was my second major choice. I could have slammed the printed call log onto the dining table and demanded truth like a prosecutor. Instead, I folded the paper, slid it back into my desk drawer, and called my older sister, Danita. Danita teaches 8th grade history and has the patience of a woman who has heard every excuse a human mouth can produce. We met the next morning at a diner near Pimlico where the coffee tasted burnt and the grits were always worth ordering. I told her everything from the hallway to the phone bill. Danita listened without interrupting, stirring sugar into her cup even though she takes it black when she is not thinking hard. When I finished, she said, "You already know enough to stop gaslighting yourself." I hated the word, maybe because it fit. She went on, "You do not need courtroom proof to honor your own discomfort. But if you confront a liar too early, all you get is a better liar." I stared out the diner window at the rain darkening the curb. "So what do?" She dabbed her mouth with a napkin. "Get still. Watch patterns. Decide what you need from the truth before you go looking." I did what people do when they are trying not to become ridiculous. I observed. I paid attention. I stopped explaining her behavior to her. Celeste had a habit of tapping her wedding ring on the counter when she was impatient. Now she had begun leaving it on the bathroom sink before work. Claiming lotion made her fingers swell. She used to toss her purse anywhere. Now she kept it zipped and near her hip. She changed the lock code on her phone after years of not bothering. Every shift in routine said the same thing. There was a part of her life I was now expected to respect by staying outside it. In early December, New Hope hosted its annual candlelight program. My mother sang with the senior choir and would have considered my absence a family offense. Celeste promised to meet me there after a hotel holiday kickoff. She arrived 40 minutes late in a green coat I had never seen and slid into the pew beside me with an apology written all over her face, but not much conviction behind it. During Great is Thy Faithfulness, I saw her phone light up in her lap. She angled it away, but I still caught the name on the screen. Nigel. She silenced it and kept looking forward. In church, with wax and hymnals and little children fidgeting in patent shoes, I felt something in me stop pleading, not explode. Stop. People think betrayal is one moment, one discovery, one dramatic scene. Sometimes it is a slow mechanical settling, like a beam finally giving under too much weight. After service, my mother hugged Celeste and said, "Baby, you work too hard." Celeste smiled and rested her head on my mother's shoulder, and for a second I nearly lost my grip on myself because she looked exactly like the woman I had loved. That may be the cruelest part. A person can still look like home while abandoning it. 2 nights later, I went downtown again, this time without coffee, without a sewing kit, without an excuse tender enough to fool myself. The hotel bar on the mezzanine had low amber lights and a piano player on Thursdays. I took a seat near the column with a plain view of the elevators. At 7:15, Celeste stepped off one of them not in work black, but in a rust-colored dress she never wore for banquets because she said the fabric wrinkled too easily. Nigel joined her a minute later. No clipboard, no laptop, no staff urgency. Just a man smoothing his cuff as he smiled at my wife. They sat at a corner table. They were careful, which told me they had practiced being careful. Not touching much, leaning in close, sharing a dessert fork. Once, Nigel said something that made Celeste put her hand over her mouth and laugh the way she used to laugh with me in the car when the world still felt manageable. I stayed for 32 minutes. I know because I watched the wall clock above the bar and counted each one like a stitch. Then I left before they could see me. I had wanted certainty. I got something worse. I got a moving picture of my replacement. At home, I sat in the dark living room with the Christmas tree unlit in the corner, because Celeste said she had no energy for decorating yet. Our tree ornaments were packed with history. A tiny saxophone from our first trip to New Orleans, a felt crab from a harbor market, a stitched angel my Aunt Odessa made before she died. We had built a marriage like people build holiday boxes, one meaningful object at a time. Trust in the collection would always equal safety. I looked at those unopened bins and knew the season was already ruined, not by one dinner, by what that dinner confirmed. When Celeste came home, I did not mention the bar. She set her purse down, kicked off her shoes, and said she was exhausted. Holiday packages are killing us. I asked, you eat? She said, just a little at work. There was chocolate on the corner of her lower lip. She did not know it was there. I almost laughed at the cruelty of such a tiny detail, being the thing that made my chest go tight. Not the lie itself. The evidence of casual enjoyment. While I had sat alone in our house, pretending not to suspect, she had split dessert with another man and came home too full to want dinner. I slept badly that month. I dreamed in fragments, elevator chimes, fabric tearing, my own name spoken in surprise. The body knows when trust has gone missing before the mouth catches up. I started waking before dawn and walking the neighborhood in my coat, passing row houses with porch lights still on, hearing radio gospel through one thin window and a baby crying through another. A man at the bus stop smoked under a knit cap every morning at 5:30. We never spoke. It comforted me anyway, seeing other people carry their own silent burdens into the dark without fanfare. Christmas approached with all the stupid obligations of appearing normal. We bought gifts for nieces and nephews. Celeste wrapped presents with neat folded corners while watching a baking competition. One evening, she asked whether I liked the gold tie she bought me for the hotel's New Year's Eve staff and spouses dinner. Everybody important will be there, she said. I looked at the tie in its box and thought about how many lives require props. I may not go, I said. She looked up sharply. Why not? Busy season. She pressed her lips together. It would matter if you came. That sentence angered me more than it should have, because matter had become conditional. Mattering meant showing up when she needed the image intact. Mattering did not include surprising her with coffee in a hallway. Mattering did not include asking why she said another man's name like a prayer she hated needing. I told Danita about the New Year's dinner, and she said, now you decide what kind of ending you want, private truth or public theater. I sat with that. Public humiliation had a seduction to it when you were hurt. But humiliation is not the same as resolution. I did not want a ballroom scene. I wanted my life back with as little poison left in me as possible. So I made a plan that belonged to my character, not my rage. I met with a lawyer named Patrice Holloway in an office above a pharmacy near Charles Village. She wore silver glasses and listened like someone sorting fabric by texture. I told her what I knew, not dramatized, just clear. The hallway, the calls, the church text, the bar. Maryland is no fault, she said. You do not need to prove the affair to leave, but practical preparation matters. She advised me to copy financial records, inventory joint accounts, and decide where I would stay if the house no longer felt livable. Order first, emotion second. Copying records was one of the saddest things I have ever done because it made the marriage feel administrative before it was even over. Bank statements, mortgage papers, insurance, the estimate for the furnace repair we had been postponing. Celeste walked past me at the dining table one Saturday and asked, doing taxes already? I said yes. The lie made my mouth dry. I hated what secrecy was making of me, but I understood then how people get pulled into strange versions of themselves while trying to survive another person's dishonesty. You start keeping your own little compartments because the open shelf has become unsafe. New Year's Eve arrived bright and bitter cold. The city had that hard winter shine where everything looked scrubbed and lonely. I put on the gold tie. not because I want to save the marriage, and not because I want to perform forgiveness. I wore it because I had decided that night would be the last evening Celeste ever got to stand in front of me and pretend I did not know what I knew. At the hotel, the ballroom glittered with black tablecloths and floating candles. Jazz rolled softly from the stage. People in gowns and tuxedos laughed with the loose confidence of people planning to be photographed. Celeste looked stunning, which is another hard truth people do not say enough. Sometimes the person breaking your heart is still the most beautiful thing in the room to you. She introduced me to vendors, 2 city council aides, a florist from Canton. Nigel crossed our path near the Champagne Tower and said, "Good to see you again, Omari." His voice was smooth, practiced. "Likewise," I said. I held his gaze 1 second longer than politeness required, and I watched understanding flicker there. Maybe he saw it then. Maybe he had seen it for weeks. Men like him often mistake tolerance for ignorance. A little after 11, Celeste was pulled away to solve a seating issue with one of the sponsors. Nigel drifted after her by instinct more than necessity. I followed at a distance through the service corridor, past stacked banquet chairs and linen carts. The hallway was bright, ugly, and practical. No glamour back there. Just work. Celeste and Nigel stopped near the old freight elevator, where staff sometimes took breathers. I heard her say, "Tonight has to be clean." He answered, "It is clean." Then he touched the side of her face with a familiarity that made my whole body go cold. I stepped fully into the light and said, "No, it isn't." Celeste jerked back so sharply her heels scraped the floor. Nigel's hand fell. For 1 long second, none of us moved. The hotel sounds carried on around us anyway. A tray rattling somewhere, distant laughter, the bass thump of song changing in the ballroom. Celeste spoke first. "Omari." Just my name, stripped down to fear. I looked at Nigel. "Go," I said. He hesitated, maybe deciding whether to defend, deny, or play superior. Then, seeing there was no version of this where he remained honorable, he left us there. Celeste started talking too fast. "It is not what you think. It got messy. I was going to tell you. I did not know how." I held up a hand because lives become unbearable once they lose their costume. "Please," I said, "do not insult me more than you already have." Her eyes filled, and for a moment the old reflex of me rose up, the one that wanted to comfort her distress even when she caused mine. I hated that reflex and loved it at the same time. It proved I had been sincere. "How long?" I asked. My voice sounded calm. That frightened her more. "Since September," she whispered. "For months." Not a mistake. A season. I nodded once, because numbers can steady you when emotions cannot. "The day I fixed your skirt," I said. "Was that already happening?" She looked away. That was answer enough, but she said yes anyway. I laughed once, softly, without humor. "You asked me what I was doing there like I was a stranger." Tears slid down her face. I know how that sounds. It sounds exactly like what it was. I expected rage to carry me then. What came instead was grief. So clean it left me almost weightless. She reached for my arm. I stepped back. That distance changed something in her expression. I think that was the first second she understood this was not an argument to survive. It had an ending. "I was unhappy," she said, and I almost thanked her for giving me the oldest weak sentence in the book. "You were dishonest." I answered, "Those are not the same." She opened her mouth to explain loneliness, pressure, feeling unseen, all the words affairs borrow to make themselves sound accidental. I did not let her finish. "You had choices before betrayal." I said, "You skipped all of them." Midnight hit while we stood in that service corridor. The crowd in the ballroom shouted the countdown, then erupted. Through the swinging doors we heard cheers, horns, and glasses meeting. Somewhere nearby, staff hugged each other and wished for blessings. Celeste covered her face with both hands and cried. I did not raise my voice. I did not call her out of her name. I did not tell Nigel's supervisor at that moment, though I could have. I simply took off the gold tie she bought me, folded it, and placed it on a catering cart. "I will speak to a lawyer after the holiday," I said. "Do not come home tonight." She looked at me with disbelief, then anger, then pleading. You cannot decide that by yourself. Actually, I said, I can decide where I sleep and what I will no longer share. She asked whether we could talk in the morning. I told her only about practical matters. She asked whether I still loved her. I said, that is not a useful question tonight. Then I walked out through the service exit instead of the ballroom because I refused to celebrate on my way to grief. The harbor air hit hard enough to make my eyes water, and for once I was glad to blame the wind. The divorce took 5 months, which is to say it took forever and no time at all. Celeste moved in with her cousin in Owings Mills for a while, then into an apartment near Mount Vernon after the hotel reassigned her, and Nigel quietly resigned. There was no dramatic collapse, no public scandal beyond whisper networks and tense HR meetings. That was more realistic. Consequences usually arrived dressed as paperwork, awkward conversations, and rooms that suddenly cost too much for one person. We sold the house in spring. I kept Aunt Odessa's sewing table, my father's vinyl records, and the crab ornament from the tree. By the next October, I had painted the shop walls a lighter color and hired another seamstress, so I could work fewer nights. Sometimes grief still caught me while pinning a hem or steaming a jacket. Betrayal does not leave because paperwork says it should. But I learned something I wish I had trusted sooner. Peace often begins the moment you stop arguing with what your body already knows. On cool mornings, I still carry that little butter cookie sewing tin in my glove compartment. Not because I expect to rescue anybody else's unraveling. Just because being prepared is different from being blind, and I know the difference now. What stayed with me most was not the moment in the service corridor on New Year's Eve. It was that first hallway, when a simple act of care made my wife tense up instead of soften. That was the real warning. If somebody treats your presence like a problem, do not explain it away forever. And when truth finally shows itself, you do not need the loudest reaction. Sometimes the strongest move is the clean one. Step back, get clear, and refuse to keep carrying what another person chose to tear. If this story showed you anything, it is that the truth always shows itself when people get too comfortable with lies. If you felt this one, like the video, share it with somebody who would have a lot to say about Celeste and Nigel, and subscribe for more powerful relationship drama stories like this. The end.